Today in the Hyper Room, I welcome Pat Lee, the man behind Dreamwave Productions, a comics publisher that brought an anime style to American comics and who revitalized the Transformers in the early 2000s for kids who grew up in the 80s like myself, as well as a whole new generation. Pat started at Image Comics working for Rob Liefeld, then went on to start his own comic company, Dreamwave, and hit comic book gold with his updated version of the Transformers. To say Pat brought Optimus Prime back to life wouldn't be an understatement. His dynamic art style gave the world of the Autobots and the Decepticons new life and influenced both the new movies and toys. In this interview, we go over his career up and down, starting in Canada to what he's doing now in Hong Kong. This is a power packed episode, so join me and Pat Lee inside the Hyper Room.
The Hyper Room.
Okay, welcome Pat Lee to the Hyper Room.
What's up? What's up, everyone?
Hey, so Pat, where are you right now?
I'm in Hong Kong at the moment. I haven't been able to travel very much, obviously, from all the stuff that's been going on. But normally, I was actually supposed to go back to Toronto to see my family. I haven't seen them in almost a year and a half, maybe even longer. And then that was like right before the coronavirus. I was supposed to book a flight ticket back to Toronto. And then when all the coronavirus stuff happened, and then it's like, oh, gotta hunker down. And so, yeah, based in Hong Kong right now, have been for quite some time. Yeah.
So you were born in Toronto, Canada. Is that correct?
I was actually born in Montreal.
Okay.
And I moved to Toronto when I was 5. And then pretty much stayed in Toronto until 2006, 2007.
Oh, wow.
I lived in LA for a little bit, but it was mostly for, freelance and just for training and stuff like that. But most of my life was in Toronto.
So you and I are about the same age. So we grew up reading comics kind of similar. Maybe tell us a little bit of like, what was your comic book reading experience as you grew up? Did you buy comics at like the 7-Eleven, or did you have a comic book store that you went to when you were younger?
When I first started collecting comics, it was mainly through 2 of my friends, Mark and Steve Furman. And yeah, they got us into comics at a very, very early stage. And my brother and I used to skateboard over to a nearby shopping mall called Thornhill Square. And there was a place called Hobby Shack there where we met the comic book owner, this guy named Jackson. And we'd always sit there, and he knew so much information about comics and stuff like that. So we hung out with him. He was really, really super nice guy. Him and his wife ran it. And every week we'd always go there and check out their new comics. And every now and then we'd go to comic conventions. We just take the TTC downtown, go to comic shows. And it was just a lot of fun, just hanging out with our friends and just like, we didn't have that much money at that time. So we would just go to like the 10-cent box and like grab what we could. And every now and then we get a couple of issues of like Spider-Man and stuff. But yeah, we were pretty avid comic book collectors. For many, many years, we collected comics.
I've heard that story so many times, the kids who grew up needing to have that 3 for $1 bin of comics and then getting hooked and then becoming professionals from that. I think comic shops don't understand how important it is to have those cheap comics for little kids, because those are the ones that will eventually grow up. Because, when we were kids, comics were like, 75 cents Canadian. And now they're like $5 US for a comic, right? So I'm not sure how inspirational kids are getting onto comics unless they can find these old 80s comics or 90s comics for cheap. It's just crazy. So if you can remember back, like what kind of comics were you reading? What are the ones that inspired you, when you were growing up?
Oh, man, there's so many. Uncanny X-Men, Classic X-Men, Secret Wars, Judge Dredd. I've collected all of Simon Bisley's work.
Wow, Judge Dredd. Let's stop there for a second. That's interesting. Usually everybody says X-Men, Spider-Man, those kind of comics, but you got hold of Judge Dredd when you were young. That's interesting.
Yeah, there were these like black and white, large scale magazines. Yeah, and I just love the artwork. And I think like just Judge Dredd as a character was really kind of like unique. So yeah, I learned a lot from just looking at the art and just studying the panel work. Yeah, and I mean that's just one of the stuff that I collected. I was really into Dungeons and Dragons as well when I was a kid.
Okay.
So we played a lot of D&D with my family and friends and stuff like that. And so we used to paint all the little figures But yeah, in terms of comic wise, yeah, we collected everything from Uncanny to, to Amazing Spider-Man to everything. We collected everything that came out. X Factor. When Tom McFarlane came out, we collected all his books, and yeah, like just
Fellow Canadian, right? Fellow Canadian Todd McFarlane.
yeah, yeah. Todd's cool, man. His work was really outstanding at that time, and I think it was like really fresh and new, and him being on Spider-Man was just like a perfect match for his style. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and I think as a kid I always used to draw comics myself, just for fun, not professionally or anything, obviously because I was really really young. But I spent all my time, like just drawing comics just for my own interest.
But that interest started to turn into like an ambition, right? Because eventually, I think you met Rob Liefeld at a Comic Con in Toronto and showed him your work.
Well, actually, it was when I think I was 18. Actually, when I was in my late 17 or 18, I can't remember, around that time. I knew at that time I wanted to be a professional comic book artist. And I spent a lot of time trying to understand how to break in. So I would go to these comic shows. I went to New York. That was the first time I met Jay Lee. I met all the Marvel, DC editors to try to break in. I had like sample pages and stuff, and it was really hard, like wasn't easy. I had to always go back to the drawing board and then try another new 5 or 6 pages. And then finally in Toronto, I met Dan Fraga, which is now a very, very close friend of mine. And he was doing a signing with Stephen Platt, who both of them at that time were very, very famous, because Image Comics had just kind of started, and, they were like kind of like looked as celebrities in the comic book world. And so I showed my stuff to Dan Fraga, and he looked at my stuff, and he's like, he just really liked it. He was like, I think I'm going to take this back to Rob Liefeld and see if he likes your work. So Dan was a really big supporter of my work, and he pushed really hard to try to break me into comics. And at the age of 19, I got a call from Dan Fraga, and he said that Rob is interested in hiring you, and we want to put you on a couple of projects. And at that time, you couldn't imagine, like, I was like kind of freaked out. I was like, holy shit.
Exactly.
I was like, no way. I got hired by Image Comics, and just to know that, I don't know, it was just really exciting, because knowing, like, I was a fan myself. I was a big fan of Jim Lee. I was a big fan of Tom McFarlane, Will Spertasio, Mark Silvestri, all those guys. And just because I've been collecting their comic books for such a long time, and to see, and to be able to work so hard in trying to break in, and I just never gave up. You know what I mean? Like, I was just like, there's no way I'm going to give up. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. And I just knew in some way that one day I was going to break into comics. So that was that. Yeah. And
That's an important part, I guess, about comics, is that you had to have a face-to-face eventually, right? Just sending in mail packets of artwork to all the big publishers is kind of tough to get, noticed, right? You'd have to like kind of go to a con, meet some professional. Yeah. So getting to meet Rob Liefeld probably more difficult than meeting Dan Fraga. And then you get a champion with him, and then he's the one that's pitching to his boss. And then they're like, oh, this guy's great. Let's get him in. They need an artist. You're on top of the mind, right? Would you say that was like best way to try to break in, is kind of get a relationship with the human side of some of these creators?
I always believe that, like, your work will always speak for itself. If you have really strong art, it'll always break you into somewhere in comics. I don't know about now. Obviously, now it's different, but at that time, it was all about like who has the best portfolio. So there's so much focus in trying to like make an amazing portfolio to try to break into comics. So yeah, I mean, definitely you got to pick your editors, and you got to listen to the editors. Sometimes it's harsh. I've had editors say, oh, you can't draw, or your anatomy sucks, and that's fine. That's all criticism that I take into positive light. It's so I would just try to work even better, and just try to prove, not to them but to myself, on how good I am, and just try to be better than my last portfolio. So at the end, you just I think anyone who's trying to break into comics, it's all about like your work. And if you want to work for Marvel, then just or DC, it's just you just got to do some really cool stuff and have great anatomy and great paneling and storytelling and great camera shots. So but eventually, yeah, you'll meet the right person, and that an editor or an artist that will like your work, and they'll try to carry you forward. But it's not easy. You got to have the right person who really likes your work, that to try to carry you forward. So I was just lucky. Like Dan's a freaking one of the coolest guys I know, super nice, and he's helped a lot of people in the comic book industry. He's helped a lot of young artists. So I was just lucky to have met the right person at the right time.
Yeah. So what was the first project you did for? I guess it was for Extreme Studios, right? That was Rob's imprinted image.
Hmm. My first like professional work was, I would say, well, in Toronto, I worked for a smaller publishing company named Culture Comics. But outside of that, if you're talking about like the larger publishers, I was for, what did I work on? I worked on, was it Profit 9? Yeah, it was Profit. I think it was Profit 9. So I was Stephen Platt at the time. He was, I think, a little bit behind schedule in one of his books. So I was like a filler pencil artist. And that was really shocking to me because, when Rob goes, okay, I want you to work on Profit issue number 9, I was like, are you kidding me? So I was working kind of like alongside Stephen Platt. And while he was, I think, finishing off issue 8, I was like working on the next issue. And man, I put my everything into that book, man. Like I didn't sleep like for like a whole month just trying to get that complete. And man, I've had the best inkers like working on me, like Jonathan Sabal, Marla Alkiza, and a whole bunch of other different inkers. And so to see my artwork being inked by such professionals was I think like kind of like an aha moment for me. So that was my first, yeah, Profit number 9 was my first comic book, and I didn't actually see it until actually I went to Hong Kong, and one of my friends had brought me to Hong Kong to do signings for Profit number 9. And at that time Hong Kong had like tons of comic book stores. So I was going from one store. I think I went to like 7 or 8 different comic book shops in Hong Kong to do signings. And then from Hong Kong I flew to LA.
So, okay, just that's interesting. How long, like, so do you remember, like, how long did it take you to draw that issue of Prophet? Like, it's your first comic. They just say, here's a script. We need it by this date, and just go for it. Is that how, I mean, I can imagine back then in those days, because Image is famous at the beginning for being late, right? The comics roll is late because the artist put so much art into it, so much work into it, and then a monthly schedule is like quite difficult to follow up. So do you remember, like, it sounded like you did all-nighters to get it done.
Yeah, usually you have about 3 weeks to a month to
Okay.
complete. Basically you have to do about a page a day. You can have a little bit of extra time, but you may have an extra 4 or 5 days, like buffer time. But you're supposed to complete at least a page a day of pencils. So and the amount of detail that I was pushing through that series, I had to be awake for like 18 hours a day to finish one page because of the amount of work that's involved. So it's being a penciler or even an inker, but mainly a penciler, it's like a lot. It's very hard work, especially want to get the right details. You want to do your best work, and because you're not always given a lot of time to do it. And it's like that with like Marvel, DC. It's like that with most of the companies. They give you a set deadline and you have to hit that target date. So
Interesting. So I guess from that issue, it comes off really well. Everybody likes what you're doing, and I think the Rob offers you a series after that, right? Isn't Bloodpool the next thing you work on?
yeah, after Profit number 9, hopefully I guess I proved myself that I was capable. And then I was offered to do my own miniseries, Bloodpool, with a writer named Jo Duffy, who I had so much fun working with. She was just really flexible. She enjoyed my work, and we had a blast working on this series. So yeah, I spent. It was only a 4-part miniseries, I think. It wasn't long. It was like these teenager kids that were a part of Young Blood or something like that, and they were like trainees or something like that. So it was a really fun project because I was using like a Japanese kind of Masamune Shirow kind of tone to the look and feel of the series. So I had a lot of fun working on it.
Yeah, I think at that time, a lot of the Ghost in the Shell, the anime and the manga and all that style was very popular. And I saw a lot of American artists being inspired by that style
Yep.
and then bringing it into their artwork, which is really good. Yeah.
Intron Depot was a very
Yeah, that's right.
popular
The
book
big art
at
book.
that
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
I remember a lot of those art books when I was in Hong Kong as well. I would see them there first, and then they would be sold in the States, and everybody had a copy of it, and they were just freaking out at the detail that was in those original art books.
Yeah.
So, how long after Bloodpool that you're starting Dreamwave with your brother Roger as an imprinted image?
Yeah, basically, I was in California, and then my father was quite ill at that time, so I had to move back to Toronto. So I started up a studio at that time, and I was freelancing still for Extreme Studios for Image Comics. And I was developing a small studio. And so at that time, we weren't thinking about becoming a publisher or even working with Image Comics. I just wanted to create a studio and then just hang out with my friends and stuff like that. So I had all these other artist friends, including Alvin Lee. I've known Alvin Lee for like forever. Like actually, he was one of the first artists that we brought into our studio at that time. Liu Kang. We had many other artists, Dave On, and then basically, yeah, we started this little studio, and then I was like kind of training people how to draw, helping people understand comics, and then all the artists that were in the studio had their own kind of like unique skill set. So one was a letterer who focused on that, and then my friend Angelo focused on digital colors. Alvin Lee was like focused on inking, and he was doing some penciling, but he was also like learning how to ink as well. Yeah, and then after like I was like I had to pay like the rental bills and stuff. So I'm like freelance wasn't enough. So I was like, how can we generate more revenue and be able to still do what we love. So I called up Image Comics, and they're all good friends of mine. And basically, we were like, how do we publish a book through Image Comics? And so they gave us the rundown. And we had this, my brother and I had an interesting idea called Darkminds that we wanted to tell a story about it. We had a really interesting concept. So we took that idea to Image, and there's a guy over there named Bob Matson who was a great person at Image Comics, and also Brent Braun. And they basically, yeah, they helped us launch Dark Minds. And when the series came out, sorry, before the series came out, we had labeled ourselves as Dreamwave, just a random name that my brother and I, created when we were young. And then our first Dark Minds comic was published. At that time, we weren't a publisher. We were just getting our stuff published through Image. And we sold like 40,000 copies, the first issue. And Image was shocked. They're like, whoa, you guys did 40,000 in the first issue. So, and the second and the third, and we had to do reprints because people wanted to, retailers had run out of stock. So it was kind of like, we were infusing Japanese anime with American comics at the time and trying to bring comic books to life using a cell animated style.
Yeah, that's
So
for sure. I remember those books really popping out because they look like they were Ghost in the Shell on paper. Maybe can you tell us a little bit what was the story about for Dark Minds to some of the people who are listening who don't know what it was about?
sure. Dark Minds is about two cops, two investigators. Basically, one was artificial intelligence, which was Nikiko, a female cop. And then the other one was Nagawa, which was like, he was 100% human. They're both very different type of personalities. And essentially, both of them were kind of, they were going after a serial killer who basically would kill people without leaving any evidence behind. So they're trying to understand like how does this serial killer move and how does he get away without leaving any evidence or anything. So, and they find out that it's just, there's this kind of this villain who has this ability to like tap into people's minds psychically, and they're able to use them as, basically diving into their own psyche to kill them, to commit suicide. So, yeah, so that's the basic premise of the story. It happens in the future, and essentially it was, yeah, and then it ended up becoming a 3 volume series, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we went up to 3 volumes, which was pretty. Yeah, I was like, whoa, 3 volumes is a lot. So, but it was, yeah, it was a fun ride. We had Omar Dogan that time. He was starting out in comics, and we gave him his first comic, his own penciling gig on Darkminds. Yeah, and then after that, he went on to, I think, doing Street Fighter and stuff like that.
So, can you talk a little bit about how you guys worked on the book? Like, you have the studio in Toronto of all your friends who are all apparently amazing artists all together. Do you guys work on the book together, or are you working on it like you would at Image, where there was a writer and a penciler and inker? Like, talk a little bit about how Dark Minds was created, if you can remember. And remember, this is 1998, right? So this
Yep.
is still pre. I mean, the internet is there, but all your buddies are there. Computer coloring is like obviously the big thing. You guys obviously masters at that as well. So yeah, talk a little bit about the production of the book itself.
Yeah, at that time it was. I think there was internet, but it was like there was all there was like chat rooms like AOL and stuff like that. It was hilarious. There was like, yeah, it was very, very primitive. I mean, there was still Photoshop, so we were just learning how to use like how to really utilize Photoshop. So we were all the whole crew was self-taught. We would just sit there for hours and days and weeks just learning these programs and stuff like that. So yeah, like most of the crew, they worked in the studio. Like they'd have their own separate station, and they'd be doing their own thing. But it was more of a hangout place than anything else. It was just until it became very serious, we actually had a schedule that basically said, okay, we have to commit. So once we realized that we need to be more serious about production work, we actually moved into a different studio, which had office space, conference room, stuff like that. But the first studio was almost like a garage, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like kind of like one giant space, and everyone was just working together in one space. Adrian Sang at that time was working at home, so he was doing writing, and he's this young kid, man. He was like, I think at
Yeah.
that time he was only like 14 or 15 years old, but he was really magical, man. Like he just had a good sense of writing and stuff like that. Super smart kid. I haven't talked to him in like, I don't know, like 20 years, but he was a good kid, man, and he helped us write a lot of books. So yeah, but more or less, like people just worked in the studio in house.
Interesting. Okay, so Dark Minds is a big hit, and you guys decide to talk a little bit about this. You split from Image, and Dreamwave becomes its own publishing company in around 2002. Is that correct?
That's correct. Basically, I met this guy named Adam Fortier, and we just had a one meeting, and then we became friends. And then I remember I was talking to Adam, and no, well, what happened was actually there was we were looking online, and people really liked our anime style. And when Wizard magazine came out, they had this thing. No, Wizard had contacted me, and they said, Pat, would you be interested in doing a nostalgic '90s what if what if series? And I was like, well, what am I supposed to? What do you want me to draw? And they're like, well, we want you to draw Transformers. So I was like, okay. So I did this one image in Wizard magazine, which was the Autobots, like, I don't know, battling against like the Decepticons. So that one image brought on so much attention. So all these like Transformer fans at that time were signing this petition to Hasbro, I think. And basically there was like, I don't know, like a few thousand people where they wanted me to draw Transformers. So I had a conversation with this guy that I just met, Adam Fortier, and we were talking about the possibility of putting together a proposal for Transformers to get the license. So then, there's all these people at that time were trying to get the comic book license. I don't know why all of a sudden at that time, but Hasbro had contacted us after going through many, many months, and they basically said that, we're going to give you the license. And so that was in like 2001. And, from that point on, we decided that we had to be a separate publishing company. It's just for the sake of, because we knew that we're going to grow. We knew that once this series comes out that we do, there was just so much hype on it. We just kind of knew that we were going to grow quite heavily. And so we decided to be a separate publishing company, and then we had to do our own printing, and we had to speak to Diamond directly. And it was a tough decision because I really liked everyone at Image Comics and they're all my friends and stuff. But at the same time, I have to make a business decision. And at that time, we had chose to be separate. So that's when we became a publishing company in 2001.
Okay, so before we get into Transformers, because it's a whole segment by itself, I just wanted to kind of look at some of the Dreamwave books you put out back then and see if you have any recollections and stories about it. Like you did comics like Warlands, Neon Cyber, Sandscape, Echo, Arcanium. You even did a reboot of the Ninja Turtles, and you did some Capcom series as well, like Devil May Cry and Mega Man. Can you remember a little bit about like how did these projects come out? Were these things that you always wanted to work on? Did the market want to see books like this? What's your recollection of those other non-Transformer books that Dreamwave put out?
Well, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Capcom and all that, we didn't get those licenses until after Transformers. So pre Transformers was like Neon Cyber, Darkminds, Sandscape, Arcanium, a whole bunch of stuff, and we had all these big artists that you see out today and doing comics and stuff. We actually brought those artists on board when they weren't even doing any comic book work at that time. So that's one thing I'm really proud about was like that we were able to seek really great talent and then bringing them on board and giving them an opportunity to express themselves and do professional work. So we had also done Necrosis, which was Adi Granov. I don't know if you know who Adi Granov is.
Of course, yeah.
So Adi Granov was actually one of the very first comics that he ever did. American Comics was through Dreamwave, and so we gave him an opportunity to work on Necrowars, and he did a whole series for us. And I remember seeing him at a Comic-Con, and he was showing his portfolio and his artwork, and we were chatting, and I was like, this guy's work is amazing. Like I saw him at my booth, and I was like, I'm surprised that no one's hired this guy. I told Roger, I was like, we got to give this guy some work. So then we put him on, the series. Obviously now he's huge because of Iron Man and stuff like that. After Dreamwave, I think he just like moved on to work with Marvel. But a big part of me just really kind of happy to see that. I'm really happy to see that I could help another artist and also to see that artist grow to where they are today is amazing. And yeah, we had just so many different books like Sandscape and Arcanium. We had LaShawn. LaShawn is also an amazing artist. Also, he's got doing his own animations now, animation projects. I think he has something
Cannon
like that.
Busters is on Netflix now.
Yeah, Cannon Busters is now on Netflix. And LaShawn was another artist who also was working with us too on our Arcanium. And then from Arcanium, he shifted to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles after.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had many different these were our own intellectual properties. There are our own projects stories that we wanted to tell, stories that we felt that we wanted to share with everyone else. Yeah.
Warlands was like a sword and sorcery kind of thing. So obviously it came from your Dungeons and Dragons fan base background, but also like Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy VII actually was super popular at that time, right?
Right.
And you did like action figures. Do you think Warlands was like the next kind of big breakout IP that you guys had?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I post like Warland stuff like out there, it's like it's really nice to see people have like the action figures. Like they'll send me pictures of their collection of the action figures, and people will send me just make some really awesome, really nice comments, and they really miss Warlands. They hope that I'm able to do another fantasy book. But when I was a kid, I was growing up on Record of Lotus Wars. It's my all-time favorite, like one of my all-time favorite Japanese anime series. And I just loved, like, obviously I was a big fantasy person, but at the same time, watching Record of Lotus Wars was like holy shit, this is one of the best anime series I've ever seen. So I don't want to get too involved into it, but at the same time, I had a lot of influence from that particular anime series.
No, let's get into it because that's quite important, right? Because you grew up with American comics, but then as you get older and the anime world starts to get more accessible to the West, I think a lot of people were inspired by a lot of the anime that came out at that time. Obviously, Ghost in the Shell, it was so popular, it influenced like the Matrix, right? The whole thing behind that whole film, and that's like late '90s as well. And so Yeah. How did you guys watch anime back then? I guess, I remember video cassette tapes, right? Mostly renting them and seeing them like that. Now you can get them like anywhere, but back then, getting the record of Lotus War must have been quite a feat, right?
It was. Well, what happened was when my brother and I were really, I'll try to keep this really short, but like when my brother and I were really young, we used to skateboard. Yeah, it's like always skateboarding, right? My brother and I never left our skateboard. We we were always skateboarding everywhere. Um, but yeah, there was this like my parents used to have a grocery store in near Scarborough, right? And in Toronto. And basically, we'd skateboard. It's pretty funny. We'd skateboard to like the shopping mall to look at Transformer toys, right? But on our way, there was a small Japanese like rental store that was like they were renting VHS tapes of Japanese anime. So we stopped by for I think there was like a Max Milk or 7-Eleven, and we wanted to get a drink. And then right beside it was this Japanese store. We're like, that's kind of weird. Like you never see that in Toronto, right? So then we go inside, and we were like, holy, what is this place, right? We're like, there's all these like Japanese like VHS tapes, and they would have a small TV there, and they're showing Gundam, and that was the first time I ever saw Gundam. I can't remember how old I was. I was really really young. Like I must have been like 9 years old or something, or 10 years old. I can't remember. But then I remember looking at the TV, going, "Holy shit, That's pretty cool, man." So I asked the rental store owner. I was like, "Can you introduce us to some like cool things?" And they're like, "Have you seen Akira?" You know, and I was like, I don't know what the hell Akira is. And he played a snippet of it. And I was like, whoa, that's like super cool. So my brother and I rented it out. And I swear for like a whole week, I think I rented that videotape for like almost 2 weeks. You're supposed to give it back to him after 2 days. But it's like,
Yeah.
I think I rented it for like 2 weeks. And I just kept playing it over and over and over again until my eyes became like little swirly little swirls, like. And I remember my mom came in the room and she's like, "What are you doing?" And we're watching Japanese anime, and she's like, "What's that?" And I was like, "It's like Japanese cartoons." I was like, and my mom like sat down. She was so cool. She sat down with us for like 20 minutes to watch it with us. Well, and it was just like very inspiring, because collecting American comics and stuff, like we never seen anything like Japanese anime before, so it was very very fresh and new to us. So my brother and I would always go back and keep renting from this VHS store place, and that's how we learn. As artists, like as an artist, I'm like a sponge. I'm able to look at something and be able to collect a lot of colors, the line weights, movement, storytelling, all that stuff. I just absorb that shit, a sponge.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so every time I would watch a Japanese anime film, like all that shit, which I would just absorb, and then I would apply that into my work, like everything that I've learned. So keep a long story
That's
short,
amazing.
that's how we got into Japanese anime.
I hate to tell you, Pat, but I think almost every kid at the same age had the same experience, like you just described
Right.
my own childhood, right? We used
Yeah.
to watch those things. I used to record Robotech on TV because
Hmm.
it used to come on at 6 in the morning for some reason. And I would just watch it, as soon as I got home from school, and then I'd rewatch them all on the weekend. I just love watching that stuff.
Yeah.
And
All
also,
the
just
things.
quickly on go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, basically, my brother and I, like, our whole lives were wrapped around skateboarding, comics, anime, watching Japanese anime, collecting baseball cards, and playing Dungeons and Dragons. That's pretty much.
Yeah. The super nerdy world when we were
Yeah.
young, now it's totally acceptable. Everybody's into it. It's like a mainstream culture now, all that stuff you just described.
Yeah. Totally.
Just one quick question I have. When we were talking about Adi Granov, Necrowar looked super cool. I totally agree with that. But when I picked it up, I always thought it was an updated Silverhawks that you couldn't get the license for. Is that true or not?
I don't know about that. We didn't really like. We were really focusing on Silverhawks, but it was just something that my brother and I were always into, like alien technology and how it could perhaps take a host of a human being. So one of our primary things was to create a story that was just more sci-fi and futuristic in the approach of like like alien type technology.
Yeah, the story is totally not Silverhawks, but when you see them for the first time, they're all in
Hmm.
these silver outfits. And I was like, oh, looks like because it was the big '80s revitalization was coming in
Hmm.
at this time, so I was thinking, oh, everybody's going to grab every single license they can from the '80s cartoons, because I think this is already when Transformers is coming out and it's super popular. So I think that okay. Anyways, that's fine. I
I
just wanted to
remember,
check with
I
that.
remember we actually tried to get the Silverhawks license. I remember
Oh.
we were going after Thundercats as well too, but I think someone beat us to it.
That's right, right? All the different publishers at that time were chasing after G.I. Joe, Thundercats. Yeah, He Man. You see all those different things. Anyways, let's continue on. Okay, so this is the bulk part. We set up the whole thing. We're going to get into Transformers because this is what you're probably the most famous and most well known for. So obviously, from what you've said already, you, just like me, we're little kids. We love Transformers as a kid. But it isn't until Wizard comes to you, asks you to draw this a what if story or this what if pinup, which I want to check now and see what issue that was, because that apparently is the very first Pat Lee Transformers artwork. I think I remember
Mhm.
seeing that as well. Tell me a little bit about, a little bit deeper into the whole process of getting the license and things like that. Like, is Hasbro, the last time we saw the Transformers in comic book format was Marvel's series in the 80s, right? So
Mhm.
that was, some people fondly remember it, some people don't. And the last thing I remember seeing of Transformers that was really cool was the movie. And that was in like 86. So that's a long time. Transformers has kind of been dead, actually, right? It wasn't even that popular a toy line at the time until you guys come on and release these incredible comics that capture the Generation 1 characters so well and also bring this kind of anime inspired look to it. So maybe talk a little bit about the beginning of, getting the license, like you mentioned before, and then how did it work getting that first issue out?
Well, as I mentioned before, basically what ended up happening was that we had decided to go after the Transformers license. We won it out of, I think, eight or nine other companies that were trying to obtain the license. And yeah, we were successful in obtaining it. And then since my brother and I, we knew Transformers quite well, at least G1. So we had decided to launch G1 series. But at the same time, Hasbro was also in the middle of doing the cartoon series for Armada. And they were about to launch a whole series of toys of that. So they also wanted us to do a back to back series of Transformers Armada. So we were releasing G1 and Armada simultaneously at the same time. And the result of it was very, very surprising for us. In a sense, we never anticipated to do the sales that we did. We never anticipated become something so big. And it didn't really, not just the numbers, like obviously, like when the numbers came from Diamond, we're like, holy shit, this is blown up. We celebrated and everything. It was great. But it didn't really hit me until I went to New York. And when I went to New York, we had like a 4 block lineup, and that really like freaked me out. I was like, wow, I didn't realize like how many.
Was that a Comic Con you were at?
It was a retail shop, and
Okay.
yeah, and it was we were, I think we drove down there. We drove down there to New York, and we were only there for like 2 days or whatever. But we were there specifically for a comic book store signing. And I think I did a sketch for almost every single person who got a book sign.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and that was, I can't, it was like, I don't know, it was in the hundreds, like hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of people. And at that time, it was like kind of, my brother and I realized like, holy shit, there's a lot of people that really liked our first issue, so. And then yeah, and we just kind of just continued. We just kept doing G1, and we did everything that we could. We did G1, and then we did Armada, and we did trade paperbacks, posters, anything that was like print. We tried to do. So it was a really great time.
What's your favorite Transformer to draw and the one that you didn't like to draw the most?
I think a lot of Transformers will kill me for saying this, but like I think Unicron was like the one thing that I didn't want to draw. Um,
No, I
there's
don't think
just
anybody will fault you for that. That thing is
there's
huge.
just too much detail, and but we had other artists that really love to draw Unicron, so I was like, okay, you guys can draw Unicron. I think for me, my favorite, man, that's a hard one. Looking back, I would say I don't know why, but like I really enjoy drawing. I really enjoy drawing Sunstreaker, the yellow Lamborghini,
Yeah.
and I really love to draw Soundwave. Soundwave was really fun. I just drew Megatron and Optimus Prime so many times that I was every time I draw it, it's just like I wouldn't even have to think about it. It's just like it just come very automatically, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
like every time I drew Soundwave, it was like I just love Soundwave. You know, he's my I think one of my all time favorite characters, like in anything, like in comics
Yeah.
and anime and whatever. I
And
just
he has those cassette
enjoy.
tapes that you can draw the Rumble and Frenzy, Laserbeak.
Yeah, just like I just think he's so cool as a toy, and he's just cool as a cartoon character. Like when like that voice, and just like stuff comes out of his body, like cassette tapes that transform into like animals and stuff. That's super
Yeah.
cool. But anyways, yeah, Soundwave was I think probably the most fun of drawing, and I spent a lot of time on the Transformers art boxes for Takara. I put like and the covers and stuff. I just spent a lot of time trying to perfect like the way Soundwave should look like as a comic character and try to really relate that to the Japanese like designs.
That's a good segue into the next question because I always wanted to know when I went to Tokyo, I saw your art on all the Japanese packaging for Transformers. I mean, the Japanese, as we know, right? They're very specific about their properties and their IPs.
Yeah.
So having a Canadian guy drawing these packaging, like what? How did you feel when you saw them for the first time on the actual Japanese packaging for the Transformers?
I think the first time was when I remember Hasbro told me about it, and they're like, Takara's going to be putting your artwork on. At that time, it was a guy named Tom Klasarowitz. He was a VP of publishing at that time at Hasbro. Very good friend of mine, super nice guy. Really helped us a lot. And he mentioned to me, he was like, Takara's going to be putting your artwork on all their reissue toys. And I remember when he told me that, I was like, I was speechless. Like I was just like, wow,
Yeah.
that's really cool. And it wasn't until like a few months later they shipped us, I think a few, yeah, I think this they shipped us a few toys. Like Hasbro at that time would always ship us some their like new toys and stuff like that just for us to check out. And yeah, they shipped us a couple of like samples of the Takara boxes, and I was like, "Whoa, that's like super dope." And I didn't realize like how many they did. So my friends would always email me or call me and be like, "Yo, man, did you see the last reissue? It's got your artwork on it." And I'm like, "Whoa, really?" But yeah, I mean,
There's so many of them. You don't even know how many drawings you've done for these things.
yeah, I mean, it was really cool because like they would just use the artwork on all their different products. So they would use it on like the Monopoly boards. They would use it on other products related to Transformers, whatever. And
Okay,
I
let's
think,
let's hold there for a second because that's
yep.
interesting. So some of the box art looked like you had done the box art specifically for that product. And then yeah, like the Monopoly set, it looks like they just grabbed it from some of the covers. So did you actually draw pieces specific for the product or did they because I know a lot of the covers look like licensing art already. They're so great. You just take away the logo, you've got a poster already from like number 1. How much of this stuff that you did was just pulled from stuff that you had already done, and how much was actually specifically done for a product?
Well, I mean, not all the Takara reissues were, how do you say, like from the comic book covers and stuff. So, and they weren't, not all of the artwork was mine. You know, like some of them were other Transformer artists but I think most of them were from Dreamwave at that time that
Yeah.
was working with us. So I honestly don't know exactly like how many pieces were done specifically for Takara. I think there were some, but for at least for mine, most of mine, if not all of them, were from the comic books and the posters and stuff like that. So they were just reusing like the images and then applying them onto the Takara boxes.
Okay, got it. Got it.
Yeah.
And then I want to know a little bit. It's been such a long time. I'm sure a lot of people at Hasbro don't work there anymore. But can you talk a little bit about your working relationship with Hasbro when you were doing the comic? Did they have full approval on scripts? Did they look at every single panel and look at it, or did you guys just deliver it and say this is it, and then if there's any changes, we'll do it? And did that hurt the schedule at all, or how far ahead did you have to work to keep that? Licensing comics is such a difficult project to work on.
Well, we had a really good team in terms of approval process. I had one of my core project managers that was managing most of the production with Hasbro. So it does take some time to get stuff approved, which is very normal for licensing. But most of the part, like Hasbro was really super cool. Like they're really fun to work with, and we didn't have very much issues at all with Hasbro. We just had to follow certain procedures and the storyline they have to agree to. They have to approve the storyline. They have to approve the artwork and stuff. So basically, like every single page does have to get an approval, at least the pencils. That most important part is the pencils and especially the story because it has to be in alignment with what they're doing with Transformers as well. So, but as Dreamwave, a lot of the we wrote a lot of they were very flexible with the story. So we wrote a lot of the stories like just on our own, and we provide we'd send it over to them, and most of the time they were okay with it. So we never really had much difficulty in working with them for approvals.
Interesting. And so, so you have a very unique perspective on the entire Transformers franchise, right? As a fan growing up with it and then doing the comics and seeing fans line up to get your autograph and working with Hasbro directly. Why do you think Transformers is still so popular after all these years?
Well, I think in general, like when it first came out, it was a very unique concept, which is a car turning into a robot. Also, I think that the general, there's this whole thing about aliens, like, trying to save humanity, right? Which is a very kind of simple concept. But having these like kind of machines coming from outer space and being a part of our way of life and stuff, I just think it's really interesting and how they have human qualities to them. I think in our comics we've always tried to create characters like robots to have as much human emotion as much as possible. And I think a lot of people that collected our work, one thing that they liked the most was seeing Optimus Prime have some kind of level of emotion. So from the nostalgic Transformers cartoon, I think like people were really touched by the story about just about Optimus Prime trying to kind of loving humans unconditionally, and a lot of people looked at him as like kind of like a fatherly figure. You know what I mean? I just think the cartoon was I personally thought when I was a kid watching the Transformers movie, after watching all the television series and then watching the movie, it was very touching for, something that was created for a younger audience. It was quite complex, but not overly complex. It was emotional, but not overly emotional. It just grabbed the right levels or the right, how do you say, it captured the perfect story for the perfect audience. And I think people just really felt touched by the characters. And when you take the cartoon with the toys and, in your hand you have it, you're holding the toy, and then you're also watching the character move in a cartoon, everyone's going to have their favorite. And because there's like so many characters in Transformers that you just like, you're bound to have your favorites. And yeah, it was just a combination of many different things. It was the toys, the animation. It was kind of, yeah, just like like all of it combined. And it wasn't like, I don't know, like I lost track of Transformers even before I was drawing the comics. I didn't know what's going on with Transformers. I had no idea. Like I wasn't collecting the toys or I had heard of what was going on, but I was really focused on my own creative work at that time.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, when we did the comics, I think like a lot of people who used to collect them as toys and watch the cartoon, they were like, "Whoa, this like looks so much like the cartoon series." And I think that's what people kind of were excited about. Oh wow, like there's an opportunity to bring back all my old memories when I used to collect Transformers, or I do collect Transformers, and it gives an opportunity to continue the story because that's what we pretty much did. We tried to continue the story as much as we could, and we understood it as a fan. So when we were creating everything for the comic book series, we were looking at it from the fans' perspective. So which was really exciting, especially later on. I think in 2003 or 2004, whatever. I remember talking to the producer of Transformers, and I remember when he first told me, like, this was even before it was even signed, inked on a deal to do a film. And I was talking to Tom DeSanto, and he was, he just shared with me. He's like, mentioned to me that he was planning on producing Transformers the movie, and I was like, whoa, that's like that's crazy, dude. If you,
That's the live action Michael Bay film, right?
yeah, yeah, it was like even before. I think it was even before he was talking to Michael Bay. It was like really, really like earlier on. And yeah, I was just having coffee with him one day in Toronto, and he mentioned to me about it. And I was like, whoa, that's like super cool. Like, I can't wait, especially with Tom on it. And Tom, he's a comic book guy, you know what I mean? Like, he loves comics, and he just knows comics well. And for him to be on Transformers, or even like thinking about doing Transformers, like, I just knew it was going to be a success, because you just know it, because when you have a hardcore, like a fan person who understands a story, who understands a world, and who's trying to make something from the fans perspective, I think that's really important. And yeah, I just kind of knew that it was going to blow up. So
It's so interesting to hear that, right? So, like a lot of comic book creators or creators in general are building parts of history with their characters, and you now are like so ingrained with the Transformers history now, right? I mean, you brought it to a new level. You brought it back to an audience that hadn't seen it in a while. And, I mean, it sounds like you also kind of influenced them to create an actual live action movie, which is like a multi-billion-dollar franchise for Hollywood and for Hasbro. Like, how does that sit with you when you think back at it now? Like, I'm sure you don't follow the IDW comics now, and you probably don't watch the movies now. It's part of your path, but being part of that history must be something that you think about when you see your artwork from those days.
yeah, it does. Like, I don't know. I think when you get a little older, it just you just look at it and you're like, well, that's really neat. Like, sometimes I think back and like, yeah, just to be a part of like the history of Transformers and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just like, whoa, like, how did that happen? You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just really something that I always like think about. Yeah, because it's weird, because when I was a kid, when I was really young, I would sit in my backyard with my skateboard and I would draw Transformers comics just on my own time, like, just for fun. And I would do it for hours and days and weeks. And I think in Toronto, I have a comic book of Transformers that I did when I was like 10 years old or something like that. And I don't know, I believe in the law of attraction. I believe what you think and what you believe and what you desire will manifest into your life some way or some form. And I just feel like it kind of manifested on its own, I guess, just because of I had such a strong desire to want it to manifest. And it just kind of like, manifested. So it's always been, I definitely sometimes look back and I'm like, it's just really exciting to have been a part of it. And now that I'm kind of older now, I'm really excited about kind of going back to doing my own projects, just because doing creator owned projects has always been my love. It's actually, yeah, it's always been something that I always enjoyed doing. But yeah, like, I still do some IP stuff. I did some Star Wars stuff not too long ago, and I still do some stuff from time to time with Warner Brothers, and they're all great. They're all fun to work with and stuff. But there's nothing that's more fun. The most fun that I ever have is creating on my own characters.
Okay, so that's an amazing to hear all that work they do with Transformers and things like that. So now, just like Image in the comics of the '90s kind of fizzled out towards the end there, I guess there's a little bit, maybe, I don't know, too much Transformers, or the market starts to dip down a bit, and the Transformers Astro Train, as you would call it, starting to run out of gas here toward the end of it. Can you talk a little bit about what happened at the end there of Dreamwave Transformers? And how you kind of like went into being Dream Engine and started doing work back with Marvel and DC again.
Well, Dreamwave at that time, yeah, like the sales were actually, they were very successful the first 2 years. And then, but like, as every series, this happens to most IPs, like, even with GI Joe and many other IPs. Eventually you'll see a dip, right? And then basically, Transformers essentially started to slow down in sales and so forth. At that time, it was really tough for us because we had such a big team. We had an incredible amount of overhead, and obviously, it's just not easy running. It was getting much harder to run a publishing company at that time. And yeah, our sales started to dip. So we had to try to figure out how to continue being a publishing company when the sales just kept dropping and dropping. Obviously, in the great times, it was like, I think we were doing like 140, 150,000 sales. Even for Transformers, it dipped down to like 45 to 30,000 sales. We tried to do other licenses, but it was very difficult. We tried other brands, tried other IPs and stuff. Turtles did okay for us, but it wasn't nearly as close as Transformers. We tried, some Capcom stuff as well, but it was to a certain extent successful, but not again as nearly as the numbers that we did with Transformers. So we had to minimize a lot of things, but eventually we were really hurting, like our final year, and yet unfortunately we had to close our company at that time, which was really unfortunate. I think as kids we were just like really too overly excited about what had happened to us, and my brother and I were very young when we, obviously this is 20 years ago. So can you imagine, like, I'm 23, 24 years old running a company with like 40 or 50 people, and
Yeah, amazing.
I never expected that to happen. All I want to do is run a small studio, and but sometimes when your company grows, like, you can't help it. You want to expand. There's expectations from everyone, and you got to grow it. You don't have a choice. Our licensees had certain expectations. Our artists had certain expectations. Fans had expectations. So we had to grow it. And we wanted everyone to be happy with our creative work and our product. So we expanded way too fast and way too heavily. And when that happened, when things got bad, like US currency was starting to rise, Canadian dollar started to rise, currency exchange rate. So that was very hard on us too, because we were making US currency. So when we would exchange that, it would be much less than it was like, the year before. So that
Yeah.
was really, really hard for us, because we were like, how are we going to pay for rent and all that stuff? It was tough. And the final outcome was, Roger and I had one day had to make a decision. Like, we had to, unfortunately, we have closed the company. At that time, we were still doing many different other projects too. But yeah, it was really hard for me and Raj. Like it was really, really difficult. It was really hard because I lost all my IPs, and that really hurt the most, because I put 10, 15 years into developing those projects and creating them. So, I don't have those projects, unfortunately. But you know what? Shit happens, and unfortunately, and sometimes you make bad decisions, and sometimes you get hurt by it, and but it was a hard lesson, and there were tough decisions to make. Really tough
So
decisions.
you sold Dreamwave,
No,
including all the IP that was inside of it?
well, Dreamwave had to liquidate at that time,
Okay.
so yeah, we had to close the company entirely. So through the closure of the company, we also lost our IPs at that time. So
There's a guy named Christian Derry on the internet. Does he own these IP now?
you know what? I have no idea. I mean, it was 20 years
Okay.
ago. I don't like follow up on any of that stuff. I just create my own stuff now. So yeah, so
Okay.
I don't really follow up on all that stuff that happened with Dreamwave and stuff anymore.
Got it. So
Yeah.
now you're doing some work with Marvel. You did an X-Men Fantastic Four
Mhm.
miniseries. Talk a little bit about working with Marvel and DC, because this is another, characters you grew up with that you are now getting a chance to work with.
I don't know. Like, Marvel called me up one day. It was Marvel first before DC, but Marvel called me up. I can't remember who specifically, but I remember Marvel contacted me, and they're like, "We want to work with you on any Marvel project you want to do. You let us know what you want, what you want to do." And I was like, "So I have a choice?" And then
Wow.
they're
So
like, "Yeah."
this is great. Yeah. What is your choice then?
So I was like, "Definitely X-Men, because that's
Okay.
something
Yeah.
something I always wanted to do." But I also like Fantastic Four, right? Because I grew up, reading Fantastic Four comics. So I remember the editor at that time was like, "Okay, why don't we do both? Like, why don't we do a crossover with X Men and Fantastic Four?"
Wow.
So I was like, "Okay,
Great.
sure, I would love to do that." And so they came back with a concept and an idea, and they said, let's do a mini series. And I was like, okay, sure. So I was doing that. I was working on that project, and they gave me a whole bunch of other stuff like covers and 2099 like covers and stuff. So I had a chance to work on like some covers for like Daredevil, Black Panther, so many, so like all kinds of different covers. And then after that, they I think they put me on Iron Man. I did Iron Man for a couple issues.
Well, it
Um,
makes sense, right? Your Transformers robotic background, they're kind of robot looking hero.
yeah, so I did Iron Man for I think 4 issues or five. I can't remember. It was like 4 or 5 issues. That was really fun. It was a lot of work, but it was really cool. Marvel's like, can you design your own Iron Man? And then once we get it approved, we can actually like do a whole comic series of your design Iron Man. So I was like, okay, so I designed a quick Iron Man. It was a very Gundam looking kind of like feel to it, and they approved it there. And then we went and we did a whole series of that. And then after Iron Man, they asked me to work on Spider Man. So I was like, okay, sure, I'll take on Man. Like, so then they put me on Spider Man for like 4 or 5 issues, and then DC contacted me after, and I think it was Eddie Berganza, and
Okay.
yeah, DC contacted me and they're like, we want you to work on Batman Superman with Jeff Loeb's son, and I'm like, what? And I just at that time I was still doing stuff with Marvel, but I don't know, like I just couldn't turn down Batman. I mean,
Yeah.
out of anything that I'd ever wanted to work on as a kid, it would be Batman. So
Yeah.
I took it on because it's just something you just don't turn down. So yeah, they first put me on a bunch of covers, right? So I did some Batman covers. And to be honest with you, if I had ever had a chance to redo those, I would love to like, to redo them. Because obviously my style of work now is completely different. But yeah, I was just very honored to be asked by DC to work on Batman. And at that time, unfortunately, Jeff Loeb's son, I believe he had cancer, and he was unable to work obviously on the series. And I thought that actually they were just gonna stop it. Like I thought they were just gonna stop, like just forget the whole series. I was like, oh man, I hope his son is okay. And it was just really upsetting for Jeff. And I think at the very end, Jeff had decided to take it on. So Jeff Loeb had come on board after his son's passing, and so we had decided to work, and then we worked on the Batman and Superman series together. So and then we all did a special thing for Jeff's son. Everyone was involved. I think like Jim Lee was involved. I was involved. Michael Turner was involved. A whole bunch of artists like went on board to kind of support this, to support this like comic book for Jeff Loeb. And then after, yeah, and then Jeff and I just had. He's just an awesome writer. I mean, he's so flexible. He's just like, you just let me know what do you want to see in this comic book series, and I'm like, Robin in a giant mecha suit and Batman in a giant mecha suit, and they're all like fighting and shit. And then he's like, cool, let's make it happen. So then off he went, and we did a whole stint on it, and it was with the Metal Men, Batman and Metal Men, and it was Batman, Superman, and Metal Men. So it was, it was a fun project. Like I had so much fun working on it, and then I was working with an old friend of mine, Craig, yeah, who did all the inks. So yeah, that stint ended in 2007, which brought me to Asia. I was working on Batman in Asia actually when I first arrived in Hong Kong.
So now you're in Hong Kong, and I guess you're going to start to do something new now, right? You're not, because I haven't seen you draw comics for a while, but you're into all this new fine art and toy business and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on the last few years now?
Yeah, I recently opened up a toy company 2 years ago called Toy Genius, and I have like many companies. I have a company, also a brand called Interference, which is focused primarily on street culture, street art, vinyl dolls, vinyl toys, sculptures, paintings, and stuff like that. And we do exhibitions like kind of all over Asia. So we're doing stuff in China. We're doing stuff in Samzan, as well as Shanghai, and we're planning on doing an exhibition in Beijing, Hong Kong. So Interference is its own brand. So we're also doing apparel, clothing, hoodies, hats, all that stuff. But it's primarily wraps around the idea of artificial intelligence and how much that's going to change our way of thinking, and it's going to change how much it's going to change us as human beings. So that's something that we've been developing. And then also I have a toy company called Toy Genius where we produce and collaborate with different companies. Yeah, we produce vinyl toy collectibles and produce sculptures and stuff. And we work with different creative artists to develop, to create ideas. But we also are planning to do a number of different things with Toy Genius as well. Unfortunately, I can't talk about it, but we have some really big plans for Toy Genius.
That sounds great.
Outside of toys.
Pat, now this is quite an interesting segue now as well. So you have taken like this American superhero, Japanese anime style into mainland China. Tell us a little bit about, how is it being accepted? What is the market looking like in China? Are they open for superhero? I mean, obviously in China, the Avengers films are doing super well. A lot of Western creators probably don't know, are there opportunities for them in mainland China? Can you talk a little bit about what kind of
Definitely.
stuff you're seeing in there and
Yeah.
what's going on there?
Just from my perspective and my experience, I think China's a great market. For me, I love being there because there's so much you can do. Like there's just many different type of creative projects that you can work on. In China, they've got their own projects, and sometimes they want to pull in like American artists or other artists to to join in on their campaigns, and so that's what we're doing quite a lot of. We're doing quite a lot these days now. So, but yeah, like one of the things that I primarily want to do too is also bring on, take all my relations in China and also, bring upon like other artists in North America to showcase art or to, bring them into the China market. Because I've been here for 10 years, we do a lot of business in China. So, so that's something that I think there's a lot of opportunity, I think whether it's superhero or not, like, of course, you have to create the right concept because you have to remember that people in China are like, they don't know too much about North American art. I wouldn't say like, not as obviously not as much as people in the States and in Canada and stuff, right? But they're quick learners. They know, they know more and more about about American superheroes and stuff like that, or the type of storytelling that they have in the States, obviously because they have movies, that come out in China that are from Hollywood and so forth. So, but there's a lot of opportunity there. You have to remember like how many people live in China, and the opportunity is quite large there. And the market, even after the coronavirus thing, it's expanding. So it's a very interesting market to be in. Yeah, like I think like if there's artists and creative people that want to, get into, into that market, that they should really look into it because there's a lot of opportunity there.
What do you think is the main city for people to start looking around in outside like Hong Kong? Hong Kong, was we know, is more
Mm.
international city. You can just land into Hong Kong and speak English and get around pretty easily. But are you like you said, you're
Sure.
spending more time in Shenzhen and things like that, or where's the main hub?
Well, I mean, if you look at like, I would say Shanghai is like I love Shanghai. It's one of my, I have a lot of friends there, and it's just a great city. It's very creative, fashion, like pop art, street art, stuff like that. Like it's very creative. Shanghai is a very creative space. Then you have Beijing. Beijing is more like a lot of films are made there. It's more. There's also a lot of art there as well, right? But um, I think like a good starting point to be is probably Shanghai. Shenzhen is it's growing. It's very tech heavy, but at the same time, there's a lot of growth there with the culture, with like street culture and street art and stuff like that. So so it's constantly changing. Like every year, it's like it's different. It's changing. So, but I would say that Shanghai is mostly like the hub where a lot of creative people flock to. Like Koss had a huge exhibition there. A lot of big artists like go there to do shows. So yeah, I think Shanghai is definitely a big hub to
Cool.
to show off your creativity. And certain times in Hong Kong are great too. Like when during the Art Basel period, at the the last show that I had during Art Basel period, there's like tons and tons of people flying in. So hopefully, when all this coronavirus stuff is over and life goes back to normal and the flights open up, I hope that we see more creatives like coming into Asia to like check out, because there's a lot of opportunity. So
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you on that. And I see that you're working with your old friend Dan Fraga. He's doing a crowdfunding comic book. Has
yeah.
this inspired you to get back into comics?
Yeah, I mean, we were working on a comic book series like before that, but yeah, Frank is, because to be honest with you, like my brother and I are like, we're one of those people, like we like to create shit that we don't know how it's going to come out, and we have no plan, we have no real plan of exactly how it's going to go out. But talking to Fraga was really cool, and seeing him raise like so much interest into his old project. Because Black Flag, I worked on Black Flag when it was one of the first projects I worked on when I was a kid. So when I was 19, it was like one of the first comics I worked on was Black Flag. Because Fraga is like such a good friend of mine, I was like, and he asked me, he's like, can you do a cover for me? I was like, of course. It's like a no brainer. It's like something like for
Hmm.
sure I would do, just because it's one of my very, very close friends. So I did a cover for him, and it kind of spawned some interest in what he shared with me was this whole Indiegogo thing. Just through like the fundraising element and stuff like that. I don't know much about Kickstarter. I don't know much about that stuff. So when he the process of it and stuff like that, I was like, that's pretty cool, man. And I really think that like comics is going to change in some way, like seeing some of my friends like raise money through this type of method. I think like I really encourage other comic creators to go in this route, because it's not easy, to publish your own comic. Like back in the day, like when I was starting out, man, if you weren't going with like a big company, like there's very, very difficult to, in terms of like, getting the money to create your own comic book and get it printed and published and produced. It was not an easy thing. But in this digital age right now, it's like, you can crowdfund it. Don't be shy about it. Don't be afraid to do it. I always believe I'm one of those people, tomorrow's never promised. So act on it today. If there's something that, it doesn't have to be comics, it's whatever you want to do in life. If there's something that you truly desire to do, have eagle focus and just really move into the direction of the desire that you want and manifest the shit out of it. That's how I've always thought. And I really believe that. Anything could happen tomorrow, so you might as well do it now. And don't think about it for too long. It's like just do it if you're really passionate about it. I think the whole comic book thing is really changing, and I really think it's heavily moving into the digital world. And a lot of people keep talking about like, is it going to be like half movie, half comic book? I don't think that. This is just my personal opinion. I just don't think like having moving comic books is going to be. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think it's either you turn it into an animation or you make a really, really cool comic, because people still like to see still frame art. And there's a lot of people that still like to read. So, of course, people are going to be really innovative and create like moving images and stuff like that. But I think if someone wants to like spend their time on content, they're either going to turn on the television or turn on YouTube or whatever and watch something fully moving, or they're going to sit back and chill out on their couch and like download a book, spend some good time reading like a cool comic book with great art. So, based upon what I've seen out there in terms of like raising funds for comics and stuff like that, there's a lot of people doing it, and I think that's a really solid route to go if you want to bring your creator-owned comic book to life. Don't be afraid of trying it out. If you don't succeed in it, that's fine. Try it again. Keep doing it until you get it out there. But I think a lot of creators, they don't know the process. Like research it, find out how to do it. Look into every angle on how to do it. But I think it's really important to understand not just how to create a comic book, but understand the process of actually getting out into the market.
It feels like yourself. I think a lot of creators are have to be half creator, half businessman these days if they're going to survive in this industry, right? I think that what the Kickstarter, the crowdfunding, the internet in general has really turned the tables on the whole publishing world. As we're seeing right now, right? DC Comics is now severed their ties with Diamond, leaving the comic shop, the retail direct market very, very uncertain. But at the same time, we see a lot of comic books on Kickstarter and Indiegogo just doing amazing numbers from very well-known creators about their original IP. They don't need to go to Image anymore. They don't need to self-publish. They could go directly to their fan base. And that scares a lot of people. Like if DC's leaving Diamond and big name creators are not even publishing and selling to comic book stores, where does that leave that entire business in like say 10 years? Will there be comic book stores in 10 years? What do you think about that? You've worked with Diamond in the past. So
Hmm.
you have some good perspective on this.
Sure. Well, I mean, like you look in general in terms of retail stores, right? It's like I think like it's really important to have a digital presence by far. Like it's I think right now it's still important to have a retail presence, but equally important to have a digital presence as well. Whether if I was like a retailer, I would be having my stuff. I would have eBay accounts. I would have, Amazon accounts. I would just like try to find every single possible outlet in the digital market world to get my products out there. Another way is like, I see a lot of retailers like doing Facebook Live or Instagram Live, just like people love that shit, like people love to like sit there and just be like, okay, oh, like he's pulling out like a side swipe or whatever, like and he's doing it for like 1999, or whatever. But like people just like to do insta buys, you know what I mean? Like they just want to be like,
Yeah,
people like auctions, and
they do.
it's a new form. It's like you see a lot of people like sitting there just watching, and it becomes a routine where they need to go into that room for that hour to like buy something or to to bid for something. Like the power of the internet, you know.
I know it's crazy. I follow Rob Liefeld on Instagram, and this guy doesn't need to do this, but I feel like he loves his connection with his fans. He does these live, not auctions, but he does a live like home shopping network of his products that he sells, like
Yeah,
autographed books and sketches and posters and things like that. And I feel like he just loves the connection he has with his fans rather than
totally.
he needs to do it, right?
Totally, totally. Honestly, like even for the last 2 weeks for myself, I've been posting a lot. Um, and I have a lot of people messaging me, like
Yeah,
just about their experiences with my comics and stuff, and I get to know the people that collect my work. And I like honestly, like for the last 2 weeks, I've literally almost messaged every single person that has messaged me back. That has messaged me, I would respond. Even if they leave a comment, I'll respond. Because I want to know who they are. Like I don't know, like back in the day, it's like the only time I would connect to like a fan or like someone who collected my work was at a comic book convention. But I think like in this day and age, it's like you need to connect with the people you have to appreciate the people that connect that collect your work. You know what I mean? It's like they're putting their
agree.
time and their effort to buy your shit, to buy your
Yeah,
work. You know what I mean? Or
yeah,
to be even interested to even like an image on your Instagram. It's like, and you know, like especially on my Facebook, like I get people messaging me like I have some people messaging me saying like, I'm an artist and I'm really depressed about what's going on in the States and stuff like that. I don't know how to handle it. So I spend a lot of time with some of these people just because I don't want them to feel like that. It's like God gave you this like amazing talent, man. You know, and all you need to do is push that button in yourself to activate, to take your skill and create something amazing out of it. And it's like, and I try to help people through that process because like I've in my life I've had many people go through very difficult times in their life, and I have many people that have like commit suicide, because of depression. And I want to get people into this kind of when I see people like that, it reminds me of those people in my life that I've loved and have passed on. And I don't want them to go through that experience. So I try to, and they have this amazing talent. So I try to go through the process with them to try to explain to them, like, you know what, you got this God gifted talent, man. Like, show the world that you know, of your work, and put all your love into it, and and it'll spark you, man. You know what I mean? Like, you just need to find what that spark is, and it'll make you more hungrier for you know, for who you are and what you're doing and what you love to do. So I even forgot what your question was, but but
No, but
anyways, I was
that's
on
a
a little bit
perfect. I
of a
think that's a
rant.
perfect. That's a great place to end it. I really want to thank you for your time, Pat. This has been an incredibly insightful and very inspirational talk I think we've had together. Can you tell people where's the best place to find you? It looks like you're on all the social medias, but which ones are you most active on? Which ones are the ones that you put like the people to go and follow you on?
I'm mostly on Instagram. So my
Okay.
IG is Pat Lee Art, and my Facebook it's I don't know. It's like it's I would say if people want to see my work, and I post every single day almost, so I'm on Instagram.
Great. Cool. Thanks. Thanks,
Cool.
Pat. Appreciate
No
it.
problem, man. My pleasure.
Follow the Hyper Room on Twitter and Instagram at the Hyper Room, and sign up for the weekly newsletter to learn when new episodes go live at hyperroom.substack.com. See you next time inside the Hyper Room.
The Hyper Room.